calling the regular meeting of the Planning Commission to order for Thursday, November 7th, 2019, and welcome all. Ms. Vaughn, would you call roll, please?
Thank you. Chair Wiscombe?
Here.
Commissioner Campanella?
Here.
Commissioner Higgins? Here. Commissioner Lodge?
Here.
Commissioner Schwartz?
Here.
Commissioner Thompson?
Here.
Vice Chair Jordan is absent.
Thank you, Ms. Vaughn. Okay, moving on to item number 2, which is preliminary matters 2A, requests for continuances, withdrawals, postponements, or addition of ex-agenda items. Ms. DeBusk?
Madam Chair, we have none.
Okay, thank you. And how about item 2B, announcements and appeals?
Yes, I would like to announce the joint meeting of the Planning Commission and City Council that will be held November 14th. That meeting starts at 8:30 a.m. and it will be held in the David Gebhardt Public Meeting Room located at 630 Garden Street.
Thank you, Ms. DeBusk. Okay. And now we'll move on to item number 2C, review and consideration and action on the following draft Planning Commission minutes and resolutions. The first one, and we do have some revisions from fellow commissioners, so we have revised copies here. The first one is Planning Commission draft minutes from October 10th, 2019. Are there any changes? Or to entertain a motion?
Move to approve as amended.
Second.
Okay, motion by Commissioner Thompson, second by Commissioner Lodge. Okay, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Great, okay, that carries unanimously. And then we move on to the draft Planning Commission minutes from October 17th, 2019. Again, we have some revisions here, redlined, that were given to you today. Commissioner Campanella, did you have an addition to that?
Yes, Chair Wiscombe, just a comment on page 7, which was the Schwartz-Thompson motion, forward the majority recommendations to City Council. There wasn't an attachment on our minutes of the recommendations, and I'm just confirming that was the voting list that we saw that exhibit. So that will be forwarded on to the joint meeting as part of the package that goes to them today.
Ms. Vaughn?
That's correct.
Okay. Thank you.
So it will include the voting record. Okay, great. Any other additions or discussion on it? Okay, I'd entertain a motion.
Move to approve. Second.
Okay, moved by Commissioner Schwartz, second by Commissioner Lodge. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, that carries unanimously. Thank you. And then we move on to the Planning Commission Resolution number 017-19 for 691 North Hope Avenue. Any discussion or comments or revisions? Okay. Commissioner Lodge?
Move its approval.
Okay, do I hear a second? Second. Okay, moved by Commissioner Lodge, second by Commissioner Higgins. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, that carries unanimously. Thank you. Okay, moving on to item number 2D, comments from members of the public pertaining to items not on the agenda. Due to time constraints, each person is limited to 2 minutes. We have one speaker slip from Ms. Anna Marie Gott. Come on up here. Let me get 2 minutes on the podium. Welcome.
Good afternoon, commissioners. So I want to talk to you about the ABR in a meeting that I went to on Monday. It was a really simple item. You know, did a project have enough parking? Was the memo actually correct? Was it agendized properly? The answer would be no to all of those. However, there was a memo that was posted on the website that the ABR members did not see until they sat down at the meeting because they were unaware of the memo. And that memo says the project has 3 proposed parking spaces. Staff, when asked about did it meet the parking requirement, says someone has reviewed it. The city attorney sat there. And so let me describe the lot. It's a square. One side down here, they're going to put a new building in right at the entrance from Gutierrez. At the top of this square, there is another building that says it's storage, only it's been used as the break room for all of the employees. And at the top left-hand side is where you're going to put 3 parking places. All of that other area is going to be used for display items for all sorts of lumber equipment, and forklifts are going to move in and out of that area into an adjacent property. And so your handicap spot is way up here in the corner. People are going to have to traverse this dangerous area to get into the building. And there's 3 parking places when it needs probably more like 7 to 8. So the image that I keep coming away with from this particular ABR and pretty much all of my meetings that I go to is an image of monkey hear no evil, see no evil, speak no evil. And I'm thinking the speak means that it's the attorney that's not going to say anything. I'm not hearing you means the staff doesn't really hear what the ABR is asking and certainly not going to tell them the truth. And you've got the ABR who's completely blind because they don't know what the ordinance are. We need written documentations for these meetings, and they need to show what is proposed and what is required. That is the only way we'll be able to hold up our ordinances or our city charter. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Scott. Okay. Seeing no other speaker slips for general public comment. Are you here for general public comment? No. Okay. Is that for item number 3? Yes. Okay, great. Okay, thank you. So I'm closing general public comment, and we're moving on to item number 3, which is a new item, and it's the application of Amy Taylor, architect for Jarrett Family Trust, 1989, property owner for 1723 Garden Street, RS-15 zone, single-family residential, general plan designation, low-density residential, 3 dwelling units per acre. The project consists of a proposal to reduce the number of units within a 12,487 square foot multi-unit residence from 11 to 9 per a 1975 Planning Commission condition of approval, and to allow various unpermitted site conditions. This project would address zoning violations in the Zoning Information Report, ZIR 2017-00334, and enforcement case, ENF 2017-01216. The discretionary applications required for the project are, number 1, an interior setback modification to allow the as-built construction of a deck and stairs and long-term bicycle parking within the required 10-foot interior setback, and 2, a parking modification to allow less than the required amount of vehicle and bicycle parking. An environmental analyst has determined that the project is exempt from further environmental review pursuant to CEQA guidelines sections 15301 and 15305. So with that, what we'll do is we'll have a staff presentation from Ms. Kokinda, and then we'll have an applicant presentation up to 20 minutes from Ms. Taylor, and then we'll move on to public comment, and then it'll be to the commission for questions and deliberations. If the commission has any really pressing questions, if you could hold them until after the applicant presentation, that would be desirable. Thank you. Welcome, Ms. Kokinda. Yes.
Thank you so much, Chair Wiscombe and fellow commissioners. Today we're going to discuss 1723 Garden Street. This is a project with a proposal to reduce the number of residential units within a multi-unit residence from 11 to 9, and this is based on a 1975 Planning Commission condition of approval. In addition, the project is to allow various unpermitted site conditions, including a garden area that ended up displacing 5 required parking spaces. There are two modifications requested today. One is a parking modification to allow less than the required amount of vehicle and bicycle parking, and an interior setback modification to allow the as-built construction of a deck and stairs, as well as long-term bicycle parking within the required 10-foot easterly interior setback. Just to orient us, the project site is in the Upper East neighborhood. It's approximately 4 blocks from the start of downtown on Solis Street, and then 3 blocks over from State Street and the major transportation thoroughfare. The Upper East neighborhood is predominantly made up of single-family residences, but if you look at the density requirements, and as you move closer to downtown, the density does increase to R2 and then RM. Looking a little bit closer at the site, this is a approximately 12,500 square foot lot in the RS15 zone, which has a minimum lot requirement of 15,000 square feet. The existing development here you can see on the screen, it's a 2-story multi-unit residence with a total of 11 units. 6 of those units are downstairs on the first floor, and 5 of those units are on the second floor. There's a detached 3-car garage in the rear. And we've looked at, kind of gone through all the history and the records, and it's been determined that this is a legal non-conforming residence at 9 units. In order to really understand this project, we have to go back to 1975. So forgive me for the history lesson. I will try to spare you and keep it to the basics. But in 1974, the applicant's father actually purchased the property, and sometime thereafter, an enforcement case started because there was a complaint that 2 units had been added to the 9-unit apartment building. It was confirmed at the time that there were 11 units, and therefore the applicant or the owner had to request a variance to be reviewed by the Planning Commission, requesting that those 2 units be allowed to continue on site and that they wouldn't necessarily have to provide the required parking for those 2 units. The Planning Commission ended up conditionally approving the variance, but there was a lot of back and forth at the time between the Planning Commission whether or not to accept that proposal. So they conditioned the site with the 4 conditions. One, that after a period of 3 years, the number of dwelling units needed to be reduced to 9. That the number of tenants shall not be any greater than 15. The number of cars owned by those tenants shall not exceed 8. And this established that 8 parking spaces would be required on site. Only 2 of those conditions of approval really are relevant today, which is reducing the number of units to 9 and then requiring 8 parking spaces. And just so you know that the other 2 conditions, either they're no longer valid or they're not enforceable anymore. This is what the approved site plan looks like. So you come in from the driveway. At the end of the driveway, there are the 3 covered garage parking spaces, and you can see this whole back area here was reserved for 5 uncovered parking spaces. And then again, by 1978, they were supposed to reduce to the 2 units to bring it back down to the legal nonconformance at 9. But the whole reason that we're here today is the applicant requested a zoning information report in 2017. And as part of that, staff went out on site to do a site visit, and we also did archival research. And at that time, it was determined that the conditions of approval from 1975 had not been implemented, that those 2 units were still there, and that there were different site improvements that didn't provide that required parking for those 8 spaces. So as a result, there was a conversation with the the city attorney at the time to kind of advise the applicant kind of what their options were. So if they did choose to reduce the number of parking spaces on site, there was mention that they also needed to come up with some kind of proposal as to what they were going to, how they were going to address the decking that had been built on, as well as the open yard that is currently there today. So for the parking modification, we've already established that there are 8 required parking spaces on site. The existing is the 3 covered garage spaces, and the applicant's proposing to maintain those 3 spaces. Because that there are alterations to the parking and what was approved in 1975, it's been established that it triggers bicycle parking. And so in this case, for multi-unit residents, it's 1 bicycle parking space per unit, so 9 spaces would be the requirement. There's currently existing no bicycle parking on site, and the applicant's proposing 5 spaces, 2 of which are short-term configuration and 3 are long-term configuration, which I'll talk a little bit about later. This is option number 1, so this is just relevant to the vehicle parking. The major proposal for this preferred plan is that the applicant maintains the 3 covered parking spaces, but you'll see in this rear corner of the yard, they're actually proposing a common open yard space, a garden area that is supposed to be where the parking was, the 5 uncovered parking spaces. So it does meet the common open yard standards, and actually a little bit more of 15% of the lot area. This project still would require an alternative open yard design to be reviewed by the Architectural Board of Review. And the one thing to note is here, kind of in between the parking, the garage and the residence, there's an as-built deck that has been added on. And so the applicant is requesting that the as-built deck remain. When staff reviewed this from a maneuverability standpoint, and if this were to come in as a brand new project today, we would ask them to be able to comply with the parking access and design standards to be able to turn around on site. So this line here on the deck, this dotted line, represents the 28 feet that would be necessary to back up. We can talk a little bit more about that later. And that's just the area of the deck that we would propose to be removed if you were interested in pursuing this option. This is just an image of the existing 3-car garage, and then the as-built deck at the rear that does encroach a little bit into the parking area. And then this is the existing garden area that was substituted in lieu of parking. So again, essentially you're providing open yard, bringing open yard into conformance, but you're losing parking, so it's a trade-off there. We also asked the applicant to provide other alternatives for you to consider, because just for food for thought. So a second option would be to create a 4th parking space on site. This is an uncovered parking space. You're still maintaining the garage, and you're also maintaining a majority of the garden area, but it does potentially impact the character of that rear open yard. A third option is really probably most in line with the approved plan from 1975. That is to create 3 additional uncovered parking spaces at the rear. It would be elimination of the existing open yard in lieu of parking, and it still requires a parking modification. So the 4th option, and I just will briefly breeze through this, was the initial suggestion by staff, is if the applicant was interested in removing the garage to create 4 uncovered parking spaces, a slight reduction in the existing open yard. But the applicant wasn't interested in pursuing this, so we really haven't touched on this much more. Overall, this on-street parking in this area, looking at this neighborhood, it's generally available. There's not a major parking issue up in the Upper East neighborhood, and this site has never been able to meet parking demand. The site, this particular residence has been there sometime since the 1910s, and then with parking over the years, again, it's never been able to meet the demand on site. But from staff's perspective, parking demand is not going to change if you reduce the number of units from 11 to 9, and theoretically, the parking demand would be even less than what it is today. So the staff recommendation, again, we're supportive of providing this garden area and open yard in lieu of the parking requirement, but we are suggesting that it be a modified option 1 so that that you would pull back the deck in order to meet that 28-foot clearance in order to turn around on site. And then looking at the bicycle parking, this is just an image of the full site. 3 long-term spaces, and what we mean by that, these are bike lockers that are covered storage for bicycle parking. And generally, when we are looking for multi-residential units, we want a long-term configuration. Short-term is generally more used for commercial businesses, but they're proposing 3 long-term and 2 short-term, and staff went out on site, transportation and planning staff went out on site to identify different locations. So there were other areas that were reviewed, but this is kind of the plan that they came up with. If we look from the east elevation, there are 3 long-term underneath the as-built deck, and this is one of the subject to the interior setback mod, and then an uncovered short-term space a little bit further to the front of the building. And on the west elevation, again, 1 uncovered space. It's towards the rear of the property, but again, not the most ideal for bicycle parking. So we asked for your consideration as just part of the conversation whether or not you would be interested in reserving one of the garage bays to be used for bicycle parking. The current garage was built long ago and is substandard to the parking design and access for the interior dimensions. So when you have a really constrained parking space, it's less likely that you would be interested in parking your car there. So one suggestion would be to use one of those bays that you could fit 6 additional bicycle parking spaces, either at an angled rack, or the less preferred option would be some kind of hanging bicycle rack. Again, looking at this, you were out on site, you could see that you can still fit a vehicle in the space. There will be some limitation to opening the doors and swinging, so it's more just whether or not that you're interested in providing this. And I know it was also discussed on the site visit, but it's worth noting that for the existing tenants on site, there doesn't seem to be a large demand for bicycle parking. Maybe 2 tenants have bicycles. But when we think about these projects, we're kind of thinking about the future orientation and not just who's there presently. So the required findings for you all to make would be that the project is consistent with the purposes of the parking regulations and somehow based on an unusual or unique circumstances of the particular case that it warrants a reduction in parking. And when we look at the purposes of parking regulations, we're looking at facilities and site design that allow for a choice in transportation modes. You're looking for allowing reductions in parking where in required parking spaces when warranted, and allow for some type of flexibility in parking design where warranted. So in terms of staff support, we definitely agreed that this is a unique circumstance. It's very odd to have a legally non-conforming 9-unit apartment building in a single unit zone. We do not believe that there's no increase in parking demand by reducing the number of units to 9. And 6 of the 9 units are proposed to be less than 600 square feet. So they already qualify for a parking reduction. And generally the parking demand is less when you have such small units. And I just should also comment that maintaining that open yard in the back in lieu of parking requirements also, it maintains that single residential unit feel. So it's a really beautiful backyard area. It's common space that could be used by all the residents. And I think that there's a lot of interest to not necessarily make that a parking lot. So moving on to the interior setback modification, it's a little bit confusing, but I want to just point out that the existing structure is already non-conforming to the interior setback to the east. Right now, it's 5 feet away from the interior lot line. The interior setback modification is for deck and stairs, a small portion of deck and stairs and bicycle parking to encroach within that 10-foot setback, but it's not encroaching any more than what's already existing on site, so it only encroaches 2 feet, whereas part of the building already encroaches 5 feet. This is a big picture of what's happening in the interior setback. This blue line right here is just the 30-foot front setback along Garden Street, and then you have the 10-foot interior setback to the east. This little portion of the building is 5 feet from the lot line, and the orange bar right here represents what's encroaching into that setback that triggers the modification. It's a little bit unfortunate because this part of the stairs and is attached to a deck. We don't have allowances in the zoning ordinance for decks to encroach, but stairs and landings can encroach a certain amount. So again, it's just this little piece that's triggered the interior setback modification. Here's an image looking towards Garden Street of the as-built deck and stair encroachment. And this is an approximation of the setback line. So you can see that this portion closer towards the front of the building is actually encroaches more, and we're just talking about a very small portion. Just a little bit more detail so you can see the proposed bicycle parking as well. That is part of the encroachment. This is proposed to be underneath the deck in 3 bicycle parking spaces that are stored, lockable, that the tenants have access to. So the findings for an interior setback, that the modification needs to be consistent with the general purposes of the zoning ordinance, and that the modification is necessary to accomplish one of the following. So it either needs to be to secure an appropriate improvement on a lot, prevent unreasonable hardship due to some physical characteristics of the site or development, result in development that's generally consistent with existing patterns of development for the neighborhood, or somehow promote some uniformity of improvement to existing structures on the site, or construct a housing development containing affordable residential units. So staff is supportive of the interior setback because we think this is it's necessary to secure an appropriate improvement on the lot. The amount of encroachment is minimal. It doesn't encroach any more than what's existing. We don't believe that there are going to be any significant nuisance issues on site, noise, lighting, or any type of visual impacts. And then historically, this has been there for quite a while now, and we haven't had any kind of prior nuisance complaints on record. So for environmental review, the site happens to be in an archaeologically sensitive area, but there's an adjacent property that has a report on file noting that there are no potential impacts to archaeological resources. So a standard condition of approval has been added to this project for the unlikely discovery of archaeological resources on site and during construction. Otherwise, the project is exempt from CEQA, from further environmental review, pursuant to Section 15301, existing facilities, and then 15305, minor alterations and land use limitations. The project did go to the Architectural Board of Review back in February. In a 5-to-1 vote, ABR made the motion that the proposed as-built garden changes were acceptable as presented, and they did comment that they would be supportive of an alternative open yard design that would reduce the parking on site. They did continue the project to the Planning Commission and requested for a few small details about guard railings. I just want to point out how much support there is for this project. I mean, you can see in the room, we received 92 signatures in support, as well as a number of letters and comments from neighbors and other residents in the neighborhood, and full support to this project. I didn't personally receive any communications opposing this project, but just to note that there were 2 at ABR. You received all those letters of support as part of your package. So the staff recommendation to the Planning Commission is to approve the project, which we consider the modified option 1, and making the findings in the staff report, which include the subject to the conditions of approval, and that does include a condition to cut back the rear as-built deck to the 28 feet between the deck and the garage. And that concludes my presentation. We'd be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you, Ms. Kokinda. Okay, let's go to, it's okay with my fellow commissioners, let's go to the applicant's presentation. Ms. Taylor, come on up. Welcome. As I said, you'll have up to 20 minutes, and if you don't use it all now, you can use some of it after public comment if you wish. No. Welcome.
Thank you. I'll be sharing my time with the property owner, Valerie Chareau, and also Mr. Dale Francesco would like to support the project during our time. So as you can see, the apartment building very much looks like a house. And staff has confused it as a house originally. But what we found in this fabulous resource, the California Digital Newspaper Collection, is an advertisement from a 1914 newspaper which basically identifies for rent Maravilla Apartments, the House of Homes, 1723 Garden Street, strangers must be identified. It fits really well with the neighborhood. All of the tenants are very courteous to their neighbors as well. So as Ellen very well described for us the situation, on the first floor we have 6 apartments, and we'll be combining 2 of the smaller units into a larger unit. On the second floor, 5 apartments, and there as well, combining and losing an apartment. So when Valerie and I began this process, we may have been a little naive. We submitted plans to simply remove a wall, remove a kitchen, and we showed the as-built garden because we felt that we were returning the building to its prior non-conforming configuration. And so logically, shouldn't the garden also be allowed to be converted back to the non-conforming parking? Staff said, no, you need to address the parking. And also, they asked us to remove a hallway door. Then staff actually recommended that we at least inquire about the possibility of keeping that garden. Valerie and the tenants love that space so much. So she got really excited, and that led us down quite another path. The first thing we had to do was identify any as-built conditions on site. So that deck off of Unit 2, a tiny little infill addition, and then the deck off of Unit 3 with that piece in the setback. From there, staff also asked us to address every single exterior component that did not show up on some kind of record. So we have stairs and decks to be rebuilt. They asked us to cut back the deck, and they asked us to include the bicycle parking because this garden is considered an alteration to existing parking, which triggers bicycle parking requirements. So here's the garage and the deck and the turnaround space that tenants have been using for several years now. The deck off of Unit 2, it's a fabulous amenity to the tiny unit. This slide is showing how the deck provides outdoor space for Unit 2. We've included this deck in open yard area because it meets the minimum sizes. Unit 4 uses this space in the side yard informally as her private area, even though a walkway comes through it. Unit 5 has a door out to the front deck with a semi-private area, and similarly, Unit 1 has a door out to the deck. We can't include any of those because they're too narrow, and also you can't include anything on a front porch. When we look more closely at the garage, turning space, and the deck, we found little benefit of chopping off the deck. Vehicle 1 will never have improvement no matter what we do with the deck. even if we remove it completely. Vehicle 2, no improvement if we chop it off. Only some improvement if we remove it completely and eliminate the amenity for Unit 2. Unit 3 potentially gains some improvement in the maneuvering, but really that's not enough benefit to justify the removal of the deck for that tenant. Again, the deck. So staff has asked you for conditions on the modification. We have our own list. We'd like you to allow the deck at Unit 2 to remain. We'd also like the public record to acknowledge the original multi-unit residential use of the property. We'd like you to allow the interior doors to remain. And also a personal request of my own is for the property owner to minimize or eliminate the landscape plan requirement. We found there's not enough benefit to justify the removal of the deck. Again, there's not enough improvement on maneuvering to take it away. I was a little surprised that the staff report that came out last week still suggests that the property was converted from a single unit residence. I think that the ad we found from 1914 is unambiguous as to the original use of that property. Ms. Giroux has asked throughout our entire process, can we please keep those interior hallway doors? I feel so much safer if we could have them. And also, in light of the evolving state laws, there may be a time that additional units will be allowed in that building again. So this is the door for downstairs, similar upstairs. And then the last item, can we allow the inhabitants to tend to their beautiful garden and to choose how it evolves over time? They're doing a great job with that space. And I could foresee that they may want to add vegetable boxes. They may want to change plant materials. And I would hate for us to dictate what they can and can't plant in that yard. They're doing a really great job. So again, our wish list for you to consider. And we really appreciate the time here. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Taylor. Who's up next in the presentation? Come on up. Welcome.
Okay, thank you. Hello, Chair Wiscombe and Commissioners. My name is Valerie Giroux, and I wanted to tell you that my original plan was to read my formal letter. But with the advice of a good friend, he recommended that I just speak a few words from my heart, okay? And, of course, that scares me. And the last time I felt this nervous was when I was asked to throw the first pitch at my grandson's high school baseball game about 6 months ago. And I want you to know that I did make it over the plate. So I think I'm going to do all right. Well, first, I want to mention how much I would like to thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak on behalf of myself and my tenants. If it were not for the commission, I would not be able to tell my story. I would like you also to know how wonderful it was for you to come to the site. I think it meant so much to me because I was able to show you what I was planning to do, and what I wanted to keep. It just gave you a better image than reading a long letter about it. I know you are aware that I was required to reduce the number of units in the apartment from 11 to 9. This was very difficult for me on many different levels, but I used the experience as the impetus for my effort in saving the beautiful backyard for the remaining tenants. And I have been working on their behalf for the last 2 years. And believe me, I've been working. That's where all those 92 signatures came from. So, as I mentioned before in my formal letter, my tenants and I are a community of friends. And as you witnessed, that building is very unique. And our experience in that building is very unique. We are really a family of friends. And we consider the apartment really a home. And so on behalf of all my tenants and myself, we all hope that you will consider saving our open space and 2 backyard decks as well. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I think you may have hit a home run. I know you were pitching and not, but it was certainly a strike, okay? We'll put it that way. Okay. Welcome, Mr. Francisco.
Thank you, Chair Wiscombe and Commissioners. My name is Dale Francisco. Most of the time I've lived in Santa Barbara. I either lived on the Upper East or the Lower Riviera. I walk a lot. I love architecture. So I noticed this building a long time ago. And I don't know when I noticed the mailboxes in front and realized it was multifamily, which is surprising. As you can see, it looks like any other single-family home in the neighborhood. Earlier this year, just by chance, I was on the same breakout group in a city meeting with Mrs. Giroux. That's how I met her, and heard about her situation and decided to look into it. And as I understand it, in 2017, when her father died, she thought at the time about selling the place and had a ZIR done. And that is the reason that all this is before you. The tenants are happy with the place. The neighbors are happy with the place. There haven't been complaints to my knowledge. And for more than 100 years, this property has provided comfortable, enjoyable housing for people of modest means. Naturally, with a house that was built in 1910, there are things that do not conform to the zoning ordinance. But overall, I would say, based on my experience over many, many years since I was in college, living in many rental places in Santa Barbara, this building is superior in terms of beauty, spaciousness, and comfort to the majority of multi-unit housing in Santa Barbara. So respectfully, I would like to suggest 3 things to you. First, granted, it doesn't meet the parking requirements, and there's no way that it could. When this house was built, my understanding is that there were a total of 400 automobiles in Santa Barbara. So planning for that was not high on people's priority list. There's ample street parking on Garden Street in this block. That's never been a problem for anyone. And so I would suggest that the open yard use is far superior to having a parking lot back there. Second, I realize that deck in the back extends, according to transportation, 3 feet into what they would like as maneuverability space. I happened to be there on Sunday when one of the tenants was backing out of that garage, and he was backing out in a large, modern, bright green Mustang. He made a 3-point turn and drove out facing the front without any difficulty. I can also tell you that virtually any place in Santa Barbara that was built before 1955 is cramped when it comes to parking. And I've lived in places where I had to make 5-point turns just to get into a parking space. So I would argue that the convenience and the safety that deck provides to the rear tenant far outweighs any inconvenience that accrues to drivers going in and out of that garage. That rear unit is less than 400 square feet in the interior. So the deck provides a considerable part of her living space. So I would hope that the Planning Commission would allow the deck to remain as is. Finally, I believe that the city made a mistake when it required Mrs. Giroux to reduce the number of units. And when that happened, and when she changed the configuration of 4 apartments and combined them into 2 larger apartments. In order to do that reconstruction, she had to evict 4 tenants. And my understanding is that one of those tenants is still in a very unstable situation, renting a bedroom in a house, sharing a bathroom, for more money than she was paying for this apartment. So I would suggest that if the Planning Commission can find it within its judgment and generosity, that it would make sense to give the owner of this property the option at her discretion of restoring one of those, reconfiguring one of those larger apartments back into 2. They would be the same size as many of the other units in the building, and regardless of what happens in the future to this building, one day Mrs. Giroux will sell this property, or her heirs will sell this property, and maybe somebody will come in and try to get the maximum rent. But even if they do that, with these units, I think one of the smallest units here was under 300 square feet. These are small units. So there's a limit to how much even the greediest landlord could gouge anybody. And I think that the benefit to the city of having that extra affordable housing unit is a solid one, and one that I think you should support. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Francisco. Ms. Taylor, did you have anything else to add, or at this time? Okay. So you have 4 minutes and 46 seconds left if you need it later. And if I forget to give it to you, stand up and wave your arms and say, I've got time left. So, okay. If we don't have any pressing questions, I'd just like to move to public comment, I think, and then it'll be back to the commission after Ms. Taylor has her 4 minutes and 46 seconds. So we have quite a few speaker slips, and I appreciate all of you coming. I think the showing is great. If you have 2 minutes each, and if I know that there's one yield of time here, and I see them both in the chambers right now. And if you're just repeating your support or opposition to the project, feel free to just say that and move on. You know, you don't have to use your 2 minutes. So, and what I'll do is I'll call the first speaker up, and then I'm going to also call the second speaker, so you can kind of keep coming up here. So let me just get this down to 2 minutes. Okay, so the first speaker is going to be Sheila Lewis, and followed by Gary Carroll. Okay. Welcome, Ms. Lewis.
Hi. My name is Sheila Lewis, and I've lived in Santa Barbara for 51 years now. And I'm here today to support my good friend Valerie Giroux, who's owner of the apartment at 1723 Garden. This dwelling has provided housing in our community for more than a century. Literally, at this point, hundreds of residents have come and gone. It's provided, it's a beautiful building, and it's provided this beautiful outdoor environment, and that has encouraged recreation and utility and just social chances. The original development of the backyard began over 100 years ago, and that open area had a legal standing for 65 years until 1975. At this time, the city enforced a parking lot. This ruling involved the entire yard, including all of the planting beds, a large clothesline, which was located on a cement pad, and the asphalt areas were used for entertainment and recreation. This measure did not consider the needs of the tenants, nor did it respect the historical precedents of this property. In 1984, Valerie moved in to 1723 Garden, and she began managing this restaurant. The landscape that had existed in 1975 remained the same for approximately 29 years. The use continued as an open yard and not as a parking lot. In 2003, some of the paved areas were repaired, and a small bit of asphalt was removed and replaced with lawn. This improvement benefited the tenants and enhanced their use of the yard. The fact that the majority of renters in Santa Barbara cannot afford to own their own homes does not diminish their desire to participate in outdoor living at their own residence. I know that Valerie feels passionately about providing an outdoor living space that enriches their lives as well as an affordable place to live. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your comments. Okay. I should remind everyone, I didn't before, but there is a timer up there, so you will be able to see the clock ticking down. Okay, Gary Carroll, followed by Susan Billig. Welcome, Mr. Carroll.
Thank you. Members of the Planning Commission, it was nice meeting all of you this day before yesterday at the property. My name is Gary Carroll, and I thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak on behalf of my very good friend, Valerie Chereau. I'm very familiar with her property located at 1723 Garden Street, and I support all of the effort involved with saving her beautiful backyard for the well-being of her tenants, the neighbors, and our city. I'd like to emphasize the environmental benefits that exist by preserving this green space because it's contributing to the protection of our valuable habitat. We're facing an environmental crisis that continues to impact our planet with increased intensity. Global warming has influenced extreme changes in the world climate, which in turn threatens us with droughts, fires, hurricanes, and floods. We understand these conditions are the result of greenhouse gases caused by auto emissions and other toxic vapors. I was a professor of chemistry at Santa Barbara City College for 37 years, and I understand on a scientific level the degradation that's caused by excess of methane and carbon dioxide emitted into the atmosphere. I'm also aware of the factors that can chemically alter these effects, these harmful compounds. Fortunately, plants and trees continue to consume carbon dioxide, a known greenhouse gas, which mitigates this toxicity. I believe we should support those who advocate a campaign to plant millions of trees. A collective movement which is aimed at saving our forests and all of our green spaces is also necessary for us to protect the earth from devastation. It would be environmentally unconscionable to transform a beautiful backyard landscape with lush variety of trees and plants into a parking lot. The health and preservation of people and all living organizations is far more important than the concern of cars parking on the street. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, Susan Billig, followed by Lois Capps. Welcome.
Hi, I'm Susan Billig, and I'm Valerie Chereau's longtime friend. I'm here to support her request for a parking modification and to provide current and historical background for the apartment at 1723 Garden Street.
Put the mic down. Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much. I didn't mean to interrupt you. Go ahead.
It's okay. As a librarian at Theodore Roosevelt School in the early 2000s, I drove the Upper East Side visiting parents and students. Due to the low population density of the neighborhood, I always found a place to park in front of their houses. Today, when I visit Valerie, I always find parking in front of her house or across the street, night or day. Upon recent inspection, it seems that in her block, there has been very little change in the number of parked cars on the street. Ms. Chereau's apartment house was built in 1910 and blends in with the other houses in the neighborhood. At that time, there were, I thought it was 300, but now I hear that there are 400 registered vehicles in the city of Santa Barbara. It's unlikely that tenants owned cars, so public transportation, a trolley car, ran down Garden Street. Currently, only 7 tenants own one car each. 3 of them park in the 3-slot backyard garage. 4 others use the available parking on the street in front of the apartment. The city's proposal is to cover the backyard with asphalt parking spots beyond the 3 existing garages. The apartment structure is not a 3-story, modern-style, lot line to lot line apartment building that needs a parking lot It has a large front porch and blends in with the exteriors of the other homes in the block. The backyard was not designed and never intended to be a parking lot. The narrow lane to reach the backyard is 140 feet long, and the 3 backyard cars pass just inches away from the apartment structure to get there. Toxic exhaust, bright lights, and noise will impact neighbors and several tenants. One backside neighbor and one next door neighbor and most other houses on Garden Street do not park in their backyards.
If you could
I
wind up,
hope you
please.
can agree that parking you can save a green open space so we can use the backyard for what it was intended, to dig in the garden, to read in the shade, to picnic in the sun, or to kick a soccer ball. You should keep this space spacious. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments. Okay, Lois Capps, welcome, followed by Linda Fredericks.
Thank you very much for allowing those of us who support this modification to speak on behalf of our dear friend Valerie. But it's an honor to admire the work that you all do, and that you will take the time to hear both sides, all sides of an issue. I'm the backyard neighbor, and my family and I have lived behind this beautiful apartment complex building. It's not a complex, a building, since the 1970s, early 1970s. Never once has there been any complaint about the fact that there are several people living in a dwelling. And the thought of where my upstairs bedroom looks down upon the lovely backyard now, and would look down upon and be infected by that exhaust that's been described. This request makes good sense to me. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your service to our nation. Okay, Linda Fredericks, followed by Linda Van Patter.
Yes, I'm glad to be here. Thank you. My name is Linda Fredericks. I'm a Santa Barbara resident and have lived in the city for 54 years, and for 46 of those years at my present residence on Prospect Avenue. I'm a close friend and a neighbor of Val, and I am very familiar with her apartment, as my daughter has lived in 2 of her units while going to City College and having her first job here. This has given me an experience and a firsthand opportunity to know that Valerie cares about the well-being of her tenants. The city of Santa Barbara has benefited from the housing that she and her family have provided for many years. Her priority has always emphasized the importance of giving affordable, beautiful, and a very healthy environment for her tenants. And these priorities are the motivation for her strong desire to keep the open backyard as it was intended. Her wish is for all of the residents to have the opportunity to enjoy this important part of our culture in Santa Barbara. I think it would be a terrible decision and probably a big mistake to take this and replace this open yard with a parking lot, especially when really it is just not necessary. So I have here a form letter that 92 people signed, which was against the changing of the backyard. So all these signatures were collected by Val.
I think
Nice
we
job,
have
Val.
that.
Do you have that?
Yes.
Okay, great.
And I counted 92 signatures on the petition.
Thank you so much.
Yes.
All right.
Thank you very much. Linda Van Patter, you'll be followed by Anna Marie Gott. Welcome.
Hi, thank you. My name is Linda Van Patter, and I've lived in Santa Barbara since I came to UCSB in the early 60s. My daughter's mother-in-law was a tenant at Garden Street for over 6 years. Before that, she was homeless due to some medical and financial issues. But earlier this year, she was asked to move out because her studio unit was needed to combine with the one-bedroom unit next door in order to comply with the city zoning decision. She is now renting a room in a residential home with a family with 3 teenagers at about $100 more a month than she was paying Ms. Chereau. She's also been on the senior housing waiting list for 3 years since she became eligible by age. In all the time she lived there, she never complained about the parking situation. I often drove down Garden Street and saw her car parked in front of the building. And whenever I or my daughter and her family visited, parking was never a problem. I have met some of the other tenants, and I'm aware that they don't all own cars. I also know that they all take pride in the landscape, some even helping to maintain the lovely front and backyards. I therefore see no reason to force Ms. Chereau to convert any of her landscape or decks for more unnecessary parking. And I have been saddened at the loss of 2 affordable living units when it is needed so desperately by our city. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Hey, Anna Marie Gott, you're next, followed by Dr. Pamela Post. Welcome.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. So what we're talking about is a gentleman who actually passed away. His daughter now wants to sell the building. That is how all of this started. And when you sell this building, you will actually reap a substantial benefit if the number of parking places are reduced and they are actually put out on the street and you have a great big backyard. If we are really worried about affordability, which I've heard a number of speakers actually mention that, a lot of people signed a form about the backyard, but none of them actually thought about the affordability. We know that properties exchange hands here in Santa Barbara, and often the rents skyrocket. If we are going to give a benefit of a reduction of 5 parking places and not require them in the backyard, then we need a concession. That concession should be 5 units that are by covenant affordable for 55 years. That is what we should be asking for. If she wants to have the 6 unit, as she mentioned about the woman who just recently moved out and has been unable to find housing, I really don't care. But then make a 6 unit as a covenant, affordable for 55 years for someone with moderate to middle income. We need affordable housing. This is not guaranteed to be affordable housing forever. We've already heard from the applicant on numerous occasions that there are plans to sell this property, or her heirs will. That property will then become market rate. And if we are giving a concession, especially when you think about our AUD units, which already require 1 parking place, and this one has none, and more importantly, downtown will actually have more units without parking, but they would have to pay up to $160 per month to park a vehicle in one of our downtown parking structures. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Scott. Okay, Dr. Pamela Post, you'll be followed by Bendy White, and Kathy Snow, I see here, is ceding her time to Mr. White. So, welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair and Commission members. Pamela Post. I'm an architectural historian. Some of you may know me through our firm, Post Hazeltine Associates. And we're very familiar with projects in which we work with old historic homes, sometimes adapting them and sometimes, adding new housing to the property. And I would like to speak very much in favor of keeping the open space, because this is often discussed in issues when we're discussing various planning issues for these type of projects in which we work with older houses. Open space is very, very important, particularly when you're talking about the use and convenience and amenities, for the tenants, but also that involves the historic structure itself. This is an important building. It's built in 1910, and its surroundings are a significant contributor to the building as an historic resource. So certainly like to see it, the open space maintained. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, let me set this to 4 minutes. Okay. Welcome, Mr. White, and you're going to be followed by Nancy Darrow.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the Commission. I'm Bendy White, and I'm here to support this tasteful little project. One of the things, as Ms. Gott was alluding to the AUD, they had some interesting AUD ideas going a century ago, did they not, in creating this little project? And this is a landmark eligible property. And one of the elements that I think is really important to look at here is the front yard setback. Its face to the street is elegant. It's spaced back. It's not just, as we know, the higher density projects tend to get jammed up to the sidewalk. This remains back and gives us, the public, that good feeling. And I appreciate that staff has made the call, balancing the open space as opposed to the parking. Those are two requirements that are on the books, and the judgment has come down predominantly in favor of the open space. The deck is a major resource to that small unit, and I think that, again, is a balancing act of that occupant there gets the benefit, gets the breathing space of using that deck. And I, too, was disappointed to hear that the unit was removed. I've visited that property often. We are friends with Val, and never found ourselves jammed up with parking, and certainly the building just works well as a communal space. I think it's also really important to remember back. I mean, the previous speaker was talking about the fact that a streetcar used to go along here. This is a transit-friendly property. This is a pedestrian-friendly property. There's shopping nearby. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of jobs nearby. So this is really a working place for downtown and an enormous asset. So I urge you to support this project with the recommendations from staff. Give consideration to adding that unit back and allowing this project to go forward as is. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, Nancy Darrow, followed by John Jameson. Welcome.
Thank you. My name is Nancy Darrow, and I am here to read a letter from Erica Rutledge, who happens to be Val's neighbor. She's in that beautiful home that you see to the left of Valerie's. So, of course, any changes to the property greatly impact her. She is expecting her third child any day now, and that's why she's not here. Dear City of Santa Barbara, I am writing this letter on behalf of my neighbor, Valerie Chereau, at 1723 Garden Street. I am asking that you grant her an exclusion and allow her to keep her backyard as is. We've never had an issue with any of her tenants who park on Garden Street. They've always been quiet and respectful. We park on our driveway and hardly notice their vehicles. There is plenty of parking available on this part of Garden Street, and her tenants aren't competing with anyone for parking spaces. If Valerie was required to provide more off-street parking in her backyard, I believe that the noise created by car doors slamming and the light pollution created by cars pulling in and out would be an incredible nuisance to our family. Our children's bedroom window, our kitchen window, and our family room window all directly face Valerie's backyard. I imagine it would also be an incredible nuisance to the Capps family who lives directly behind Valerie. Further, all of the houses directly surrounding us are historic single-family homes, and Valerie's home seamlessly blends into the fabric of the neighborhood. If she had an off-street parking lot in her backyard, it would turn her charming, well-kept historic home into an apartment complex that wouldn't blend in. Please allow Valerie to keep her backyard as is. Her tenants parking on Garden Street isn't a problem, but it would be awful for Valerie's neighbors on all sides if she was required to turn her backyard into a parking lot. Please feel free to contact me if you have any questions. Erica Rutledge, owner of 1721 Garden Street, and I think you have a copy of the letter.
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Great. Okay, John Jameson will be followed by Robert Stroke. I can't read it. I'll ask him to announce his name, and then he'll be our final speaker. Thank you. Welcome, sir.
Thank you. My name is John Jameson. I live at 1708 Garden, which is the corner of Valerio and Garden, and I'm opposed to the variation in the parking. The next house, 1718, used to be a grandfathered rooming house, and sometimes there was as many as 14 cars lined up from that one. And now it's been reconverted back to single-family dwelling, and the people don't park on the street. And couple that with the city attorney managing to get rid of most of the RVs, the whole area has greatly improved. In fact, that side of Garden, I don't think there's anybody parks off the street, and the other side, only this apartment building is the thing. My daughter's a professor at Brown University in Providence, Rhode Island, and you can't overnight park on the street. So when you go there, you drive, it's beautiful, there's no cars all over the place. You come back to Santa Barbara, it's like driving in a parking lot. Most streets are 2 lines of cars. So I'm opposed to the variation in parking. I think it's a step backwards from the direction we're headed. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Okay, our final speaker, Robert Strong, is that right? Yeah. Yes. Yeah, I found your letter, so I couldn't read your last name. Welcome,
Sorry.
Mr. Strong.
Yes, I'm a retired Santa Barbara police officer. I retired as a police lieutenant about 30 years ago. I have a document signed by Mayor Lodge to that effect. I share a backyard with Valerie, and close neighbor is Lois, so how can you go wrong? Very nice people. They have a nice little backyard. They have little parties there. It's right next to our backyard. And I would appreciate it if you did not have any more parking back there. I like just the 2 cars. Otherwise, we're going to get the pollution, noise pollution, and exhaust pollution. But you have my letter there. I don't really have anything to add other than the fact that I have 14 grandkids. All of them at one point are looking for a place to live. Valerie's house is a perfect place to live, clean, neat. And we have a structure of merit as designated by the city, so we're very fussy about our neighborhood. We don't have any no parking signs on our street because we live on the Upper East Side, and we all know the Upper East Side people are very snobbish. So you can park on that street forever, but nobody ever parks on the street. There's no abandoned vehicles from that particular place. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Good closing arguments. Thank you very much, sir. Okay. That's great. Before I close public comment, we have letters, multiple letters included in our documentation, so I won't read all those names again because they're in the packet that was available online. But we did receive some additional letters in support. Linda Fredericks, Gary Carroll, Susan Billig, Sheila Lewis, and Linda Kerr. And we also received the petition in support of the owner with the 92 signatures. So I'm glad my 92 matches the 92 that we received. So there's multitude of public comment letters for it. So with that, I'm going to close public comment. Let's give Ms. Taylor her additional 446. Yes, Commissioner Higgins. Make it 5? Okay, we'll make it 5. Be generous, yeah. Okay, five extra minutes if you have something to say, and then you don't have to use it. Trust me, you really don't.
I know, you've heard enough. What do you want to say?
Well, I just wanted to comment about me wanting to sell the apartment. After my father passed away, that was a real bad time to consider a big move like that. I also was diagnosed with breast cancer at the time. I'm fine. It's all good. But I just think I was in a place in my life where I shouldn't have been making a decision about moving, and I have no interest in doing that. I just wanted to add that. Okay?
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Anyone else from the applicants team? Okay, great. That was 4 minutes and 12 seconds left. So, okay. So a lot of lights went on. It's now back to the commission for questions and deliberations. And I know Mr. Higgins' light went on first, and then I think Commissioner Lodge's light went on. So we'll start with Commissioner Higgins.
Yeah, for staff, what is the history on the removal of the units? Because I would think, though, some of the enforcement case, given that some of it's being resolved today, theoretically, the units wouldn't have had to necessarily have been removed, or was that a voluntary removal of those units ahead of this action, the enforcement case, or what's the deal there?
Chair, through you to Commissioner Higgins. So technically, the city still recognizes that there are 11 units on site. I know that there have been some changes to the walls or removal to reduce it down to 9 units, but that was done without building permits. So there's no city.
So that's voluntary?
That was voluntary.
Okay. So then, I know that would be awkward, to say the least, to try to act on something that's not been agendized in terms of adding units. But was that ever offered as an option to the applicant in terms of, like, could there have been 10 or 11 units?
To my understanding, this was very heavily researched by the previous city attorney, Scott Vincent, and Susan Reardon, senior staff in the planning department. When I understand that there was conversation about what the potential options could be, and the possibility of maintaining 11 units would be a very different process. But it was also established at that time that the applicant could return to the 1975 conditions of approval. And so that's the project that we received. And I think maybe at that time there was more conversation and concern about keeping the parking. But I would also yield to the applicant to maybe speak a little bit on that, of what the experience was.
Well, okay, I don't want to open up a can of worms, but it sounds like the applicant was not, fair to say the applicant, as far as you could tell, wasn't offered that option to keep some of the units. Otherwise, she may or may not have voluntarily removed them.
Well, that's not exactly the case, through you, Chair. That from verbal conversation with staff who were looking at this, that a lot area modification or lot area mod was proposed as a possibility, but again, I'm not entirely sure of what those conversations look like.
Okay, I'm going to assume it's just going to be a place of awkwardness too, in terms of what's on our agenda today to act on. I guess I had a question about the original variance findings and whether or not Commissioner White would have approved something like that. But then I realized he would never have done something like that because he's a planner by trade. So approving variances is not something he would ever do, notwithstanding the duration.
I'm just going to jump in here for a minute because I did ask the city attorney, I asked Ms. Ostringer this very question, Commissioner Higgins, that you're asking. If the Planning Commission in 1975, and I think Mr. Lusitano will have to weigh in here, the Planning Commission in 1975 reduced the number of units to 9 from 11. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And do we have the right here, as of 2019, to reverse that decision and keep it legally non-conforming at 11?
I would like Mr. Lusitano to answer that question, please.
Thanks. Well, I think that's what Commissioner Higgins is getting at. Yeah.
What happened in 1975 was the variance was approved, and then they had conditions of approval, and the condition that said that applied was at the end of 3 years, the number of dwelling units shall be reduced to 9. That never happened, so that condition was never satisfied. So there is no right to the 9 or the 11. It's, you can vary the number of units if you so choose. There is no one with any right to do it because it wasn't phrased as a right. It was phrased as a condition that never got satisfied. So it's an open question.
So the city recognizes 11 legally non-conforming units. Is that correct? Up to 11 legally non-conforming units.
I'll
does
defer
that
to
give
Allison on
does that give the owner the right, if she chooses, to convert one of those units? I don't mean to jump in here, but this was the very question I asked. Does this give her the right, if she so chooses, she started a conversion on one unit without the permit, we know that, and she's admitted that. So does she have the right to undo that work and go up to 10 units or up to 11 units if she chooses without any further action from anyone?
Well, my understanding is the current legal non-conforming is 9. Is that correct, Allison? And so that, if she increased it, that would increase the density, which you can't do if it's a legal non-conforming, correct? Okay.
So the answer is no. She
Correct.
has to keep it at 9.
Yeah.
Okay. Commissioner Higgins, did you have something to add to that? Because I know it was your
just
question.
to ice the cake here, what would be the procedure, if any, to increase the density on this parcel?
Chair Wiscombe and Commissioner Higgins, we have looked into lot area modification as an option as well as variance. Those would be the two possible ways that we'd have to look at more closely to see if one or the other could get to that density.
So the lot area modification would also come along with some affordability restrictions.
That's typically the reason for the support by staff.
Including several other unintended regulatory consequences as well, I assume. The variance is not something we practice.
It's in our code. It's an option.
So, thank you.
So what you're saying, it's a subject for pursuing at a different time in a different place. Okay, so we have that under. Okay, good. Okay, Commissioner Lodge. Yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Lusitano, it's been suggested that the Planning Commission condition these requested approvals with some form of rent control and the possible. I know the current owner has no intention to sell, but someday that building is going to be sold and the rents will go up. Is that something that the Planning Commission can do?
Not necessarily at this juncture. What's before you is the modifications for parking and the interior setback. So going outside the purview of the realm of what's to be considered would not be appropriate.
So if the Planning Commission chose to approve the requested modifications and so on, then would it be up to the owner to come back to the city to ask for this as a condition? I mean, because we wouldn't.
Correct.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Sure.
Yeah, it sounds to me like that's a subject if the owner chooses to come back with perhaps an additional 1 or 2 units back up to 11, that, perhaps at that point the affordability part of it be entered into. That's my understanding, but since it's not on our agenda today, we can't. But it looks like that might be a path for you if you wanted to pursue that in terms of, and obviously adding affordability provisions is something that would perhaps make that look more favorably. So, okay. Commissioner Campanella, you're next.
Thank you. Question for staff. There, in its current form, there's 9 livable spaces in the building, I guess. But if these were if there were no kitchens, by whatever definition it is, a stove, whatever you would take out, if this were just then a single-family house, by just the fact it has a number of bedrooms, what would be the parking requirement?
Chair Wiscombe and Commissioner Campanella, we do have a definition of residential unit. So if this met that definition, it would require 2 parking spaces. However, part of that definition has to do with how many individual leases there are within the building. So I believe 5 is the maximum within one single family residence in terms of defining household. So that could weigh into that determination on the parking. So we would have to take a look at what that configuration is and how many leases. But for example, if you're suggesting that there's 1 kitchen and they rented out 9 bedrooms, I don't know that would technically that would be classified as group residential, 1 kitchen with 9 separate leases. So it wouldn't be allowed in the zone without a conditional use permit.
Okay, so there are various situations technically where parking could vary, depending on whether there's leases or a stove versus a microwave, et cetera. And if that were the case, there wouldn't be any more the difference in parking, assuming which qualify, there wouldn't really be a parking demand change from what it is now. I mean, if there are 9 people living there or 11, the demand, quote unquote, would still be the same. It's just a matter of what's the designation of the particular building, what is, and physically what may be going on. So that's one question. The other one is, in its current legal non-conforming, whether it be 9 or 11 state, based on current ADU regulations, can this property add a combination of a junior ADU and a detached ADU in its current form? Would it be legal to do that based upon the new ADU laws that just came into effect?
Well, I think through you, Chair, Commissioner Campanella, I know that the accessory dwelling unit, the new regulations that will be going into effect are still under review. Because this is legal non-conforming to 9 units, right now there's no, our zoning ordinance does not allow that for multi-residential units, but it does appear that that's part of the legislation, the new legislation package that was passed, but not really clear on all the details of that. So that's forthcoming, working with the city attorney's office now.
Okay, so that's from a state versus local standpoint, and local having to conform with state. We still have to see how that would work. We're not clear on that yet, correct?
Through you, Chair, yes, that's correct.
Okay. Okay, what else? I think that's the only questions I have now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Campanella. So we know the answer to, or we don't know the answer, but we know the procedure if you want to increase the number of units. So let's try to work on what we have in front of us, which is the parking modification and the setback, the interior setback modification, which are before us. So, okay, Commissioner Schwartz, you're next.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If we could go to slide 21 of the staff report. This is parking modification, staff recommendation, modified option number 1. I have a question for staff. Slide 21. So the second bullet reads, recommend a modified option number 1, which consists of maintaining the 3 covered parking spaces with the condition that the deck be set back a minimum of 28 feet from the garage to accommodate turning around on the site. To Ms. Swanson from Transportation Planning, if vehicles, these 3 vehicles that are parked in the existing non-conforming garages today can turn around on site to leave the property, why does Transportation Planning staff feel that there's an issue that needs to be remedied? That would result in reconfiguring or shortening the deck.
Good afternoon, Commissioners, Chair Wiscombe and Commissioner Schwartz. When we look at any project with parking, we apply our parking design standards, the same standards for every project. So when this came before me, for this scenario where you would have to exit and do a 180, we don't have a standard dimension. We have a standard, and I could bring up a slide for it, for the 90-degree scenario for parking. So the standard for a 90-degree scenario would be 28 feet. When I looked at this and used, so when we don't have a standard in our parking design standards, we use what we call turning templates that have turning radius for a standard vehicle, 16.5 feet long. It's not your long truck, it's not your short car, it's somewhere in between.
But it's a car, it's a size vehicle that would fit, as all three vehicles do when we were there on the property.
So,
all three different sized vehicles each fit actually within each of the enclosed garages now.
I don't know the length of the vehicles that were demonstrated at the site visit, but the depth of the garage is 17.5 feet. Our required depth is 20. When we grant waivers for existing garages to be modified, 18.5 is the shortest we go. These are legal non-conforming garages.
Yes.
So we don't take away that existing situation. So they're already hard to park in for some vehicles because they're quite shy of our standards. The width is the same. So just taking that into consideration, the size of the stalls, in addition to an as-built deck, and is that something we could approve? We have to apply the same standards that we do for every project. We don't look to see what vehicles exist on the site at the time. So using the turning templates, I was looking for a compromise where they could retain some of the deck, and I could also say I could do it in one maneuver. One maneuver is exiting backwards and then pulling forward. We also have to take into consideration how you get into the garage. So the deck does affect the maneuvering area for getting in. It's not just exiting.
Well, when you say affect, Ms. Swanson, how does it affect? Because we saw, for example, maybe somebody can use the pointer that will show up on the recorded hearing today. So the third down, or the closest one to the deck, yes, that one, there was something like an SUV, some larger size vehicle pulled, that's Ms. Chareau's vehicle, pulled all the way in, straight in. So clearly it came down the driveway, maneuvered to the left,
yes.
Since that is her car, I presume she, the property owner, she does this regularly, and then pulled all the way in.
So using a turning template, that wouldn't work with a standard vehicle necessarily in one maneuver with the deck the way it is, using a turning template.
I see, okay.
So this is what we have to apply to every project and try and be consistent as far as how we apply the standards. So if your direction, so it would be a waiver to keep the deck as is and have a less than standard maneuvering area. And if the direction of the commission is for staff to grant a waiver for that, that's something we can take into consideration.
Thank you, Ms. Swanson. Then I would appreciate if Ms. Taylor could have put back up on the screen your slide of your requests of the commission. And I know that Commissioner Higgins has a time constraint, so I would appreciate hearing from some of my colleagues about your specific requests.
This one?
Yes, that one. And then I think you had some sub-bullets.
Yes.
That you pulled up underneath that, each of those 4 items.
I have those on separate slides.
Oh, I see.
We can run through them if you like.
No, that's all right. Why don't we just leave it at this one? So allow the deck at Unit 2 to remain. Now, the second item, acknowledge original multi-unit residential use. Ms. Taylor, do you have a concern about that? And I'm asking because in our staff report, there is reference to this structure as a multi-unit residence. Is there some other, in fact, in a number of locations? So do you have concerns of a different reference somewhere else and how that affects?
What I read in the staff report was that they recognize that this has been multi-unit use since 1926 or 1927.
Okay.
And that's when the zoning ordinance began. And I would like to establish formally that it was prior to the zoning ordinance when this was constructed as multi-unit.
Okay, very good. I think that's important to clarify. And then the allow interior hallway doors to remain. Is there anything in particular you want to bring to my or our attention regarding that as we consider your request?
I guess, could you direct staff to allow us to leave those doors instead of removing them?
And are these the, correct, remind me, are these this is the unpermitted work? No, it's permitted.
No, these are original doors.
Maybe you could just show me where on the plans.
So this is the version with the removed door, but there's an original door of the building with its moldings. And staff has asked us to remove one or the other of these doors to the hallway so that it can't more readily be made into a new illegal unit.
Okay, these are original?
Original.
Is this an issue for us or for ABR? Who's reviewing the project?
Removal of doors is...
Well, it's interior. That's why I'm asking
Oh.
the question.
So, Chair, through this, I'm guessing this happened before I came in to work on this particular project. I assume that it might have been concurrent with the zoning information report coming out, perhaps with Susan Reardon and Scott Vincent, the city attorney at the time. But in terms of, I think it was just a concern. Generally, if there's an opportunity to create more units, that's just a concern. So if it was requested at that time, but I don't think that there's a strong opinion in terms of what's being proposed today.
So the Planning Commission can choose to support or not support Ms. Taylor's request, but we're not. It's actually not on our agenda. So we could support it and
well, I'm sorry. Yeah. Well, let me clarify then, Madam Chair, because if staff is requesting a change to the property, we have many changes to the property, either requested by staff, requested by the applicant. There's some tension between the two. I believe it is our responsibility to take those issues up today. And they are zoning, and they are land use, and they are development. So I want to be clear about what staff is requesting of the applicant, the property owner, and why. So that's why I wanted you to put your slide back up, and I would like to hear, unless, Ms. Kakinda, if you have anything else to add, or that was pretty much staff's position. Okay, because I don't understand why an original interior hallway doors are being requested to be removed. I'm at a loss to understand that, so I need, and I'm not hearing any clarification about that. Okay, let's go to the next
Chair
bullet
Wiscombe
point.
and Commissioner Schwartz,
Oh, yes.
I think just to clarify that, I think the reason is, as Ms. Taylor explained, when there are improvements that make it easier for a unit to be created illegally, staff often requests that those are not included in a project because...
But even if they're original to the property?
Sometimes, if there's a concern, if things have been converted in the past. So, but that is something that the Planning Commission could comment on.
Okay, and then let me go to the fourth item, minimize or eliminate. So is there anything further about this, Ms. Taylor? Because I have some thoughts about this one, but I want to hear from you. Anything else you wanted to comment on?
I just feel that the property owner has gone so much to get to this moment that I would hate for her to be forced into an additional drawings. They're doing a great job with the yard. It is in the backyard. And Ms. Shiro said her water usage is incredibly low. So she may be able to provide documentation in support of low water use in lieu of a required irrigation plan.
Okay.
But it could be any combination.
Okay, very good, thanks. This is, for me, this is an important slide, and I like to be able to reference it when I come back to my comments. Thank you. Those are my questions for now.
Thank you, Commissioner Schwartz. Commissioner Thompson.
Right. I want to follow up on Commissioner Schwartz's question to Ms. Swanson. Ms. Swanson, you said if the commission chose to allow the deck that's on the back of the building to remain, that it would require some sort of a decision on our part, some sort of a variance? You telling me that your design guidelines require some sort of a formal action?
Chair Wiscombe and Commissioner Thompson, let me clarify. So the parking design standards, we have the ability to grant waivers at a staff level. This is done through a building permit process. It's not anything beyond that.
So it's not a planning commission waiver?
No.
If we told you to leave the deck alone, you would grant your own waiver then?
Right. It's what we can take in consideration as part of granting the parking modification, recognizing that the spaces might not be as usable as they could be, and that you're okay with that. And so that's direction to us.
Thank you, Commissioner Thompson. Commissioner Campanella, you had a question, or you want to?
No, I'm not going to make a comment yet. I just want to be clear on the designation of what this property is, if it's multi-unit residential or legal non-conforming single family, okay? And that's what may happen in the future, okay? And I'm talking about accessory dwelling units. In one case, if it's a single family home, legal non-conforming, maybe it can't add anything, I don't know. Or maybe it can because it's a single family home by designation. So it can comply with the new ADU law relative to what a single family home can add. Secondly, if it's multi-unit, I believe there's another right that a property owner would have to add either 2 units or 1 ADU and 1 junior ADU without any parking requirement, assuming it qualifies, and I presume in this area it will. So if we're going to, let's say, allow exceptions, we probably should have an idea of what might be allowed in the future before we give those exceptions, and whether we cut off the possibility for an ADU, not that we want to, but just because of our designation, or we allow ADUs because of our designation, which is the request. So that's, I'd like, and maybe we don't care what happens in the future, but I'd like to just maybe distinguish what the property rights would be, whether it's designated as legal non-conforming single family or as requested by the applicant for us to consider multi-unit residential.
So the city recognizes this as legal non-conforming to 9 units. And I understand that the applicant has provided information that multi-unit residential use was established at the beginning, that there's a disagreement about that. City records acknowledge starting in 1931 that there's an apartment building on site. So there is a discrepancy between what the applicant thinks and what city staff, again, Scott Vincent and Susan Reardon, making a call back in 2017, looking at this particular issue and identifying it as a single family residence. I didn't focus as much on that in my staff report because, again, there are previous records from 1914 that the applicant showed, kind of identifying it as an apartment building or, apartments for let, but that's not a city record, and so therefore it's not how we've designated it.
Okay, so just to clarify a little further, we'll clarify maybe for the first time. If we are giving an exception to parking because we'd rather have the rear yard there, which, and we may all agree with that. But the exception for parking to have a rear yard, that rear yard may convert to other use in the future. It could convert to a duplex without any additional parking requirement. So I just want to make sure that if we're doing giving a modification because of the current use, that current use may be different in the future. Could be, and it could legally be different in the future. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think Commissioner Higgins is next. He's going to make some comments, but this slide is fine, but what's before us are two modifications and making the findings for the 2 modifications. And we're not really at liberty to be deciding on whether this is single family or whether it's legal non-conforming multi-residential at this point in time. So I would like us to move forward on what's in front of us and look at the modifications. If Ms. Kokinda could put the findings and modifications back up there, your staff recommendations, and then we can go on to discuss what is actually before us today. Okay, so your staff recommendation is to make the findings in the staff report and then subject to the, and you want the modified option 1 for the parking, and you're recommending that we approve the interior setback.
That is correct.
Yeah,
That's
okay.
correct.
Okay, great. So I just wanted to clarify that. So we'll go with Commissioner Higgins is first. Thank you.
So thank you, Madam Chair. I'll support the project without the modification to option 1. I think leaving the deck as is adequate. I guess, and I have to apologize because I scheduled a meeting at 3 p.m. with a council member, and I don't know when I'm going to learn my lesson that we can't resist making something too complicated here at the city or at this commission, and I should have given this more time, but so I may not be able to stick around for the vote, but I wanted to really just rhetorically ask about the basis for why this is here today, given that it was initiated with a ZIR, no good deed goes unpunished, and if my understanding is the ZIR program is essentially either dead or on life support. So my real question is, how come this wasn't de-escalated? You know, if there was an enforcement case, I understand staff can't go into a property and unsee something, but there's a priority given to all of the backlog of violation cases that seems to me, in conjunction with the ZIR case, this could have been put so far down the list that it never would have seen the light of day, and we wouldn't have wasted, frankly, all of these good people's time and effort and energy, not to mention staff and all your great work and research. It sounded like you really got into it and it was exciting and interesting, but if I were in charge, I would have put staff's excitement and interest towards those things that are lingering on our long-term planning list that we just have never gotten to, AUD, historic districts, et cetera. So I would like to move this along and get it out of everybody's hair, and I wish you luck with the building department too. I think that's another place of consternation that you're gonna have some trouble with. I wish there was an appeals process for that, and maybe there is, but those are my comments. Just in terms of the applicant requests, I would support all of those.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Higgins. Commissioner Lodge?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, basically, I agree with everything that Commissioner Higgins said. I can make the findings. I don't see any benefit to chopping part of the deck off. It not only improves the maneuverability for one of the 3 parking, the garages. I also would be happy to support what Ms. Taylor has asked for, and would encourage the ABR not to require a landscape plan. I'm really puzzled by the finding that was made, by Ms. Reardon and Scott Vincent, about this being a single-family home when it has so clearly been an apartment building. I mean, it's stamped right in the sidewalk, Maravilla Apartments, since 1910. As I said, I'm puzzled by that, but in any event, I can go with the staff recommendation with the exception of the removal of part of the back deck. I also would encourage the applicant, if she can do this after 2 years spent on this, to see if she can't get back the 2 units that were removed. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Lodge. Commissioner Thompson.
Okay, thank you. Well, to me, this is a This entire proceeding is a classic example of trying to fix something that isn't broken. To me, it's unconscionable that the city has put this property owner through more than 2 years of bureaucratic process, and she has something that the city is going around saying we want: affordable rental units that fit into the neighborhoods. I mean, we're wringing our hands. How are we going to get more affordable units? And you're telling her to remove 2 affordable units. It makes no sense to me. If I hadn't been told by the city attorney that we couldn't, I was going to leave the 11 units there. And my question was going to be, and I guess it was answered, why did city staff go up the path of saying you got to remove 2 units rather than looking for a way to keep the units that were there so that we have our affordable units that we're all saying we need? These design guidelines and standards that you all like to apply are fine when you have a clean sheet design, but somebody's going to have to realize this city was built a long time ago, and not all these buildings comply with your standards and your design guidelines. So, you know, we can't force fit a 100-year-old building to fit a 2-year-old design guideline. So I'll move to, I will vote for the modifications that are requested here, with the elimination of the landscape plan and the elimination of cutting the deck back to 28 feet. But I would also urge the property owner to investigate going forward with putting the 11 units back into play here. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner Thompson. Commissioner Schwartz?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, my views very much are in alignment with my colleagues who have already spoken. And with all due respect to staff, so this isn't on the current staff who are here today, our city needs a reset. I mean, and I say this as all of us together. So it's not just staff, it's not just decision makers. We need a reset to understand that as a very old city with properties and infrastructure that have been built over decades, well, yes, hundreds of years actually. And as staff has told the Planning Commission months ago, actually last year I believe it was, when the new zoning ordinance came before us, and I asked Renee Brook, what percentage do you think we have throughout the city of legal non-conforming structures? You know what that answer was? About 75%. So most of our city is legal non-conforming, which, what does that mean? You know, getting out of planning talk, planning lingo. It means that we need a different lens through which we look at housing, parking, open yard, landscaping, the urban forest management plan that we have. And the reason I say all this is because, as Commissioner Thompson just remarked, I too was wondering, as I read through all of this, why there couldn't have been a more time efficient and shortened process, even administrative. Could even come to a Planning Commission lunch meeting. We have had items come to Planning Commission 1 hour, non-televised but public lunch meetings that in some regards were similar to this. But they were made less complicated through staff's wise analysis of what the core issues were on those items. And I think we have to, if I say get back to that, we have to force ourselves into a much more efficient, effective mode of making these land use decisions. Maybe more administrative decisions on the staff level, or with different types of hearings at Planning Commission. But at this point, I'm going to support the motion, and I want to appreciate the property owner for, first of all, the beauty, the care and the beauty of this property is something I haven't seen in a multi-unit apartment complex anywhere in the city in quite some time. I'm sure your tenants are so happy there. And I can't imagine when I asked Ms. Taylor to put up the slide with the 4 bullet points, whatever path you need to, I'm fully supportive of you pursuing those 4 points, as you heard from some of the colleagues also. So let's make some strategic, prudent, reasonable, responsible decisions with our land use planning and do the right thing, and I think we're going to be doing that today. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Schwartz. Commissioner, I'm sorry, if you could hold your applause. Commissioner Campanella?
You can continue for a moment. I wanted to calm down before are you done? You're done? Okay, they're done. I live in the area. I'm about 2 blocks away, and there are a lot of talk about we have a housing shortage. I think this area, we have a bedroom surplus. We have a lot of bedrooms that aren't being occupied that people could live in this area, whether it be through home share, joint leases, or some other creative way. We got plenty of parking on the street unless somebody's doing a fundraiser or having a wedding. I mean, or fiesta, or there's plenty of room and we have to get creative. I and Renee Brooke, our chief planner, our planner for the city, we conducted a tour from Chapala Street to the freeway, from Ortega Street up to Mission, with 41 members of the American Planning Association. And an architect conducted that tour on a lead to show the missing middle, if you will, of how multifamily housing blends in with a single-family look. And I know we're stuck on density sometimes, but we walked around little cottage courtyards that were 30, 40 units an acre. We had a 2-story house that, if you figured it out on an area basis, was 75 units an acre. Doesn't mean anything, okay? How do you blend in, and how do you create things that blend in both in, let's say, the less urban environment in the city as well as downtown? And I think if you have a window, you can have a living area. So we have to start thinking about how we use what we have, or how we create new that blends in with what we have in order to get people housed. Okay, we have to get creative and maybe have our rules start reflecting reality versus reality have to conform to rules. So I am going along with my colleagues on this first item. I don't think the deck needs to be cut back, and I'll be voting for the proposal that's turning into a motion that Mr. Higgins mentioned. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Campanella. We actually don't have a motion yet, but we have a couple minutes. Pardon? No. No one's made a motion yet. I'd like to, in a minute. Okay. I'd just like to make my comments. I think I'm in total agreement with my colleagues. I want to commend the property owner, Ms. Giroux. It's just a gorgeous property, and I think Commissioner Campanella is spot on. This is the kind of thing that we really, it just blends in perfectly with the neighborhood. Thank you all for coming out today, even those of you that are opposed to the project or opposed to the parking or one of the modifications. It's just what we want, community together that supports something that fits into the fabric of our community, and this does. And I think Mr. White made a very good comment about this is a balancing act, and that's what we do up here. And we don't need to be by the book all the time. That's why we have modifications, which we like. And in this particular case, yes, I think we all support the modifications and include leaving the deck as it is. It's just lovely, and it would be a shame to cut back space and add more asphalt when you've got livability to a very small unit on back. So I totally support it, and I thank you all for coming out, and I thank you for what you've done and the tenants that you have. And also, just one final comment, I hope when you regroup and get some rest and perhaps move on, that maybe you will pursue the 9 to 11 units. So back to 11, and for flexibility's sake, I think that will be a worthy cause for you. Okay, and Commissioner Thompson's going to make a motion, I think.
I'll move that we approve the interior setback modification and the parking modification with the findings in the staff report and subject to the conditions of approval with the elimination of the deck be set back a minimum of 28 feet and elimination of a landscape plan requirement.
Second?
Second.
Okay, so we have a motion by Commissioner Thompson, I think seconded by Commissioner Higgins before Commissioner Lodge, but, okay, any other discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Nope, carries unanimously. Thank you all very much. Yes, thank you. Okay, and we still have a couple other agenda items. Agenda item number 4 is administrative agenda. A is committee and liaison reports. Staff hearing officer liaison report. Commissioner Jordan isn't here, so I don't think we have one. Do we have other committee and liaison reports? Commissioner Lodge. Excuse me, if you all could just move the conversation and the celebration outside. That would be great while we go through the rest of this. Okay, thank you all for coming. Okay, Commissioner Lodge.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm the alternate liaison to the ABR, but there was an interesting case that came up not too long ago where an applicant proposed a certain color for a brick building at 420 East Carrillo and was to come back for final approval. But between the discussion about the color and that final approval, the applicant proceeded to paint the building almost, a shade or two above black. The end result was that no final approval was going to be given with that color, and it is going to be painted a sort of a shade of tan.
So they're going to repaint it?
They're going to repaint it, yes.
To
So
a
I'm just
color,
mentioning this,
yeah.
that nobody should jump ahead
No one
of
should
final
jump ahead.
approval.
Yes, exactly. Okay, thank you for that. Are there any other reports? Oh, okay, quiet. Okay, good. So with that, we are adjourned, and thank you all very much. Oh, I failed to mention the appeal period, but they've left the room, but I will before I close the meeting. So this, our decision today is appealable to City Council within 10 days. So for item number 3723 Garden Street. Thank you. They were all cheering so loudly, I just totally forgot. Okay, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you all.